Here we are in chapter 5, teaching a professional commitment. So we're going to learn about how it is that you are an early childhood education professional. Who is an early childhood professional? Have you ever been paid to babysit? Then you are an early childhood professional. If a professional is someone who's been paid to do a job, then you have done it and you are. So, more specifically, people who work in daycare centers are early childhood professionals. People who teach kindergarten are early childhood professionals. People who work at after school programs for little kids are early childhood professionals. People who are developmental um, psychologists are early childhood professionals. So, we promote young children's cognitive, emotional, and physical development and learning. We help build responsive family and community relationships. We observe and analyze to support young children and their families. We promote positive teaching. We work with families and other professionals to make sure that children get the services they need. And we identify with and conduct ourselves as members of the early childhood profession. So, when people ask you what you do, you should say, I'm an early childhood professional. How is this profession changing? Well, it's becoming more professionalized, right? So it's becoming more, um, many of you know, like you started out working in a child care center many years ago, and your whole background was, well, I have kids, or I have worked in childcare before. I took that one childcare class in high school. Anymore, in order to be hired in a childcare facility, especially if it's licensed, you have to have your at least your high school diploma. um, Sometimes, Head Start, you need an associate's degree or even more. So the requirements of education have increased a lot over the past 20 years or so. We know there's more research. And so the things that we do are more based on research that's out there. We also know the value of a high quality early childhood education. We know that it's an important thing for kids to have a high quality early childhood education and that it lasts for their entire lives. And we also know that more than 75% of all 4-year-olds attend preschool. So that's important. And it's becoming more of a political issue, more as we have more women running for political office. We see there's more focus on early childhood in times of crisis where people can't go to work or children can't go to school. Early childhood education and care becomes even more important, even more a focus of discussion politically and in the world. So, our job is to support children's development and learning. Basically, that's it. So, the National Association for the Education of Young Children has 6 standards for early childhood professional preparation programs. That's what you're in right now, taking child development classes at Parkland is an early childhood professional preparation program. So, what we need to do is promote child development and learning. We need to help build family and community relationships. We need to observe, document, and assess to support young children and their families. We need to use developmentally appropriate practices to connect children with their families. And we need to use the content knowledge that we have to build meaningful curriculum, and we need to identify as early childhood professionals. So let's go through all of those standards one by one. What is child development? What influences? Why is it important that we know and understand it? Child development is, like it sort of says in the title, understanding how children develop. The development of children takes place over our whole lives. Like human development is a thing. Um, but so much of it takes place from 0 to age 8. Think about that. You're born, you can't talk, you can't walk, you can't, eat by yourself, you are totally at the mercy of others to take care of you, right? By the time you're 1, most kids are, uh, feeding themselves some food, right? Let's go all the way to 18 months. By the time you're at 18 months, feeding yourself, talking, walking, right? In 18 months, right? The first 18 months of life, you do all that stuff. That's child development. So, what are the influences on that? Your culture, your family, right? Obviously, family is a huge influence on how you develop. Your language, right? Because you need to learn to speak with others. Your social relationships, your socioeconomic conditions, where you live, how much money your family has, how much education your family has, those all develop it. And then disabilities, things that are genetic disabilities or birth defects, are all things that influence how a child develops. We need to understand that most children develop on a continuum, and we can sort of predict how development is going to work, right? So we know how a 3-year-old is going to, what physically they're going to be able to do, what their language development is going to be like, what their social emotional development is like. By studying child development, we know how to work with young children. We know what they can and can't do. We also know by studying child development what children aren't doing that they should be able to do, right? So we can catch those developmental delays. If a child's not talking by 2 years old, that's a concern that we need to find out what's going on and direct that child and his family to the right resources. So, developmentally appropriate practice is developing things that you do with children based on what that child's development is, what the typical development for all children of his age is, and what's appropriate for the community. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we focus on developmentally appropriate practice. But what we're doing is trying to create healthy, respectful, supportive, and challenging learning environments. Okay. How are we building family and community relationships? Well, a family is a child's first teacher, right? And then the next teacher that child has is most likely going to be one of you, right? So, how do you bridge those two organizations, right? School and family. You are respectful of the family's culture and beliefs, their time and resources. You know that they know that child better than anybody, and you need to respect that and understand that. You need to respect their routines, and you need to tell them about what you're doing and what your expectations are at school. Another interesting part of building family and community relationships is that you, as an early childhood professional, have an understanding of child development that you can share with that family. So when they don't seem concerned that that 2-year-old isn't talking yet, you can say to them, I know 2-year-olds pretty well, and I noticed that Jason is not really talking. And I wonder if you've noticed that, if he talks at home. So it's your job, because you have that child development background, to help parents understand their children a little bit better. Observing, documenting, and assessing to support young children and families. That's just what I was talking about. So you're looking at the way a child develops, related to all the children around him, what you know about child development, and that helps you understand that child better and what has special needs or services he might need. And then it also helps you make decisions about what you're going to do with that child. So, um, if you see that Julia always goes to play with the dolls every day, then you need to think about what are some activities that we can do that involve the dolls that will help her have the right experiences and help prime her for learning. Maybe we count the dolls every day. Maybe we give the dolls names and we talk about, make up stories about the dolls. Things that the children are interested that you can piggyback on, right? And that comes through observation. And then communicating with the parents. What are their perceptions and experiences with the child? Right? So before you're saying, "Hey, I've noticed that such and such is happening at school," you're asking the parents, "Have you noticed this thing? Have you noticed that um, Sarah tends to limp after she's been running?" Maybe they've never noticed it, maybe they have, and they just haven't thought that it's a thing, and maybe you need to work on it together. So, developmentally effective approaches and the early childhood professional. So, this is using approaches that are appropriate to the child's development, and to the family's needs. So, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about developmentally appropriate practice. The content areas are what we think of, when we think of school: language and literacy, reading, math, science, art, social studies, science, technology, engineering, physical activity, and STEAM: science, technology, engineering, art, math. I don't know what that is. Anyway, how are you putting these things into your planning? How are you developing your program around these areas? When we think about development in little kids, we think about I like to think about it this way: there's physical development, there's cognitive development, that's your thinking, your brain. There's social emotional development, that's how you relate to the world around you, and language development. Language development is one of the most important things in 0 to 8, obviously, because that's when you go from crying to having a complete conversation with someone, reading and writing. Okay. So you need to know what are the essential skills that are needed at each level of development. You need to know standards. Does your program have standards about what children should be learning? You need to know how children learn and how you can guide them. You need to work with other teachers to share your knowledge and experience. And then you need to think about, what are you doing that works, what doesn't work, fixing it as you go along. Identifying with and acting as an early childhood professional. That means that you're not just going into a classroom, you're finishing up your program at Parkland, going into the classroom and never thinking about early childhood education and professional development again. It means that you are reading articles, you are going out and finding sources, you are going to professional development programs. You have to, if you're in a licensed facility in Illinois, you have to have 15 hours of professional development in service each year. So, how are you doing that? It means that you are learning from the professionals around you. And it means that you are looking at what you're doing, figuring out if it works, and then changing it up if it doesn't. So, this is a continuous and lifelong thing. Like, I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I still read the magazines. I still know that every time I teach this stuff, something will change. That the practices that I learned when I started becoming an early childhood professional are not necessarily appropriate practices or the preferred way of doing things now. And that changes from year to year. So it's important to keep track of all that, to be in a professional learning community where you are learning from the teachers around you, collaborating with parents in the community, and developing your professional philosophy and portfolio, which is something that we'll be doing in class this semester. Culturally appropriate practice means being open to cultures beyond your own, and knowing that you're incorporating things into your teaching, into your classroom, where children see their culture. So you're not going to have all kids from the same cultures in your classroom, right? So you need to learn about the backgrounds of kids in your culture, in your classroom, and ask parents. Say, hey, you know what? I've noticed that you're Muslim and I'm interested in learning more about that and how we can incorporate that into the classroom. Parents are happy to talk about this stuff for the most part. And that way, you're going to get the most appropriate information for that child, right? Look around your classroom environment. Do your children see themselves there? One time I was a director, I was working in a program. We had a toddler room. I had a multiracial child in the room. The dad was black, the mom was white. And he said to me, where will my child see themselves in the classroom? And I looked around and I saw that we didn't have any books with people of color. So we bought a bunch of books of people of color. We want to make sure that kids know that they are in a place where they are welcome. And that means making sure that every book in your classroom isn't just depicting white children or isn't just depicting Christmas from a Christian point of view, right? Um, Christmas has become a very cultural and not necessarily religious holiday, but there are many, actually there are more people that don't practice Christmas than do. So we need to think about how we're incorporating that into our classrooms, right? Making sure you're not leaving anyone out. Different cultures and backgrounds. Are you making sure that kids who are different are talking to each other and hanging out? Are you partnering up people who might not otherwise partner up together, right? And then children of different abilities, right? You may have some children who have speech development issues, but they're in your classroom. More importantly, and they're in your classroom. How can you pair them up with children that they can learn from each other, right? Um, do you work differently with children who are speaking English, who are learning English, children who have special needs? Make sure that you're working with everyone appropriately. Yes, you're going to work differently with people who are learning English, but are you, in the way that you work with them, are you um, exhibiting any bias? Are you doing anything, that makes them feel less, right? And then involving parents and families. When you have children of different cultures, the best way to get those cultures into your classroom and into your community is to have parents be involved. Okay. Pathways to professional development. You can get a child development associate, right? You can do that through care courses, I believe. You can get an associate's degree at Parkland. You can get an associate's degree in early childhood education. We don't currently have the child development associates, which is unfortunate, um, because you can get an associate's degree in early childhood education at Parkland and not be DCFS qualified. So make sure you know what you're doing with that. To be DCFS qualified to be a head teacher, you need to have 30 hours of college credit. 6 of it has to be in early childhood education or child development. At Parkland, generally, um, there's an intro to psychology or child psychology class that DCFS counts as an early childhood education class. That's about it. That are not child development classes. So any child development classes at Parkland will count toward those 6 hours to be head teacher qualified for DCFS. Okay. Um, and developing your philosophy of education. What do you believe about how children develop? What should children know, learn, and do? What's the best way to teach them? What is a teacher's role? We're going to talk about this. This is one of your assignments. You need to think through all of these things. How do children learn? And make a plan that says, this is how I think children learn. This is my philosophy when I go into the classroom of how I'm going to relate to children. We do this because it's important for you to articulate this to yourself, and it makes a really great addition to a resume when you're looking for a job. If you can say, I believe that children learn by doing. I believe that children need to have experiences. I believe that social emotional development is very important. I believe that discipline should be positive. If you say all of those things, and it matches up with the place where you're working, you know it's already going to be a good fit. Accommodating diverse learners. We need to make sure that we have a space in our classroom for everyone. So I'm going to, the NAEYC statement on inclusion is included on Cobra, so take a look at that. Basically, we want to make sure we're a diverse world with a lot of diverse people out there, and we want to make sure our classrooms reflect that.